how do you look at the fair use, and it's it's in the TPP. Jeremy says it's not in strongly enough. How do you respond to
that? Sure, thanks. So, you know, Jeremy and I agree that there's a lot of exaggeration about TPP, and I think one place you could go if you want to see some is the EFF's webpage on TPP. And I thought it was striking that he expressed some confusion about the submission and concerns that were raised in the submission in Australia that fair use may not be consistent with the three-step test, because that's actually an argument on EFF's website. They say, as a reason to be concerned about TPP, that it enacts a three-step test language that puts restrictions on fair use. USTR is putting fair use at risk with restrictive language in the TPP IP chapter. This is from the EFF webpage. So to just go to the sort of core of the argument, with respect to limitations and exceptions, sure, they're part of any copyright system. And different countries do it different ways. You know, we distribute our content all over the world, and we comply with law all over the world. And we deal with the fact that different countries have limitations and exceptions all over the world that are somewhat different. But they actually, there tends to be a fair amount of alignment on a number of core issues, even if they do different systems. So the big concern on fair use is that it's really a bait and switch, because there's really only one country that has a fair use system that's fully developed, and it's the United States, and it's been in US law for over 100 years, and the US is a common law system. So we have an immense amount of precedent fleshing out what fair use means. In fact, there is a 2-volume, 700-page treatise explaining what fair use means in the US. Now, that is not going to get exported to other countries, right? You're going to get 4 factors, or you might just get the 2 words, fair use. What that means is uncertainty, right? Because we don't know what it's going to mean in a completely different legal system, particularly, say, a civil law system, which most countries are, when fair use is a common law doctrine. But then also, you know, it has to be flushed out. So recently there was a study in Australia that said, let's take a look at the litigation and attorneys' costs if we were to switch to a fair use system. And it found between $26 million and $130 million, I assume Australian dollars, in additional legal cost each year to have to move to a fair use system. Because all of these different things, issues that have been settled in the US would have to be resolved in that in those countries. So there's also extensive literature that points out that actually one of the worst things for investment is uncertainty. And what this fair use thing, again, it's a bait and switch, because you're talking about something that has a fairly again, the precedent in the U.S. that helps explain it, but that's not what you're actually getting. You're getting a concept that may or may not mean the same thing in these other countries. By the way, EFF also understands the importance of uncertainty. In 2013, in an ISO hunt brief, they said the continuing ability of intermediaries to support platforms for citizen participation depends on clear, inexpensive legal rules. Predictability is essential for businesses developing online services. So we're talking about moving from what are fairly predictable systems to what is unpredictable. And then I'd also note that, you know, this claim that there's these claims, I mean, look at the examples that were used. YouTube couldn't exist without fair use. Last time I checked, YouTube is globally available and most of the world doesn't have fair use. In fact, YouTube has a higher market share outside of the US, which does have fair use, than it does in the US, outside the US, where most countries don't have fair use, than it does in the US. Search engines couldn't exist without fair use. Google is widely available throughout the world. And again, Google has a higher market share in Europe, which does not have fair use, than it does in the US. So, I mean, these claims are empirically just not true. And so anyway, that's why I think it's highly misleading.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate your candid views. I think that's very helpful. Jeremy, I want to give you a moment. Although, you know, one of the things I gotta say, as a avid grocery store participant who loves the Scan It technology, where I can check out my items, I wonder perhaps if your definition of innovation might be a little too narrow. When I was up on this panel on the manufacturing in TPP, another great technology company for the NAM is the John Deere company, and Anku talked about how there is more software and therefore more copyrights in one of their pieces of big machinery than are satellites going into space. So there's that issue about the breadth of it, but really, take a few minutes, take this issue where you want to go.
Sure, I'm glad you brought up that John Deere incident, because there is a lot of copyright technology being built into our everyday, our automobiles, our phones, and the problem with the digital locks that my friend from Disney referred to, the DRM, the technological protection mechanisms, sorry, there are various ways of referring to them. Problem with that is that it can actually lock up your ability to access and use your own products that you've purchased. It can prevent you from fixing your own automobile if it breaks down because of the copyright embedded software in that automobile. So EFF went to the Library of Congress to ask for an exception to US copyright law to allow people to fix their own cars if they happen to have copyright material embedded in their computers. I'd like to respond to some other things that were just raised as well. The fact that EFF wrote that the three-step test could place fair use at risk was at a time when the language in TPP was still being negotiated, and at that time we faced the prospect that there would be an addition of three-step test language into TPP which went beyond the Berne Convention and beyond TRIPS. What we got in the end was a provision that was kind of a compromise. It says, yes, all limitations and exceptions have to be subject to the three-step test, but this is not intended to go beyond Berne and TRIPS. So it was kind of pushing out and then pulling back. So the resulting provision on the three-step test is not as bad as it could have been, whereas if it didn't have that qualification at the end, then arguably three-step would have had to have been applied to existing limitations and exceptions that aren't subject to that test in Berne and TRIPS, such as the quotation exception, which is just one example that isn't subject to the three-step test. So the end result in TPP was not quite as bad as it could have been, though we're still not happy with it. Some of the other points made about fair use being bait and switch, the fact that the US has precedent on fair use that other countries don't have. So this seems a little hypocritical to me that, fair use is good enough for us, but it's not good enough for anyone else in the world. How fair is that, really? There are codes of practice, as I've mentioned, that have been developed by various communities of interest to guide the application of fair use and to make it simple. So going back to the example of YouTube, if you want to upload something to YouTube, there's a guide there on, what kind of things are fair use, what things aren't fair use. So it's not really as uncertain as has been made out. Furthermore, the US precedent can be cited and is influential in foreign countries. So other countries that have adopted fair use, such as Israel, Canada has a fair dealing exception which has actually evolved along similar lines to fair use in recent years. And in all of these places, US precedents can be cited by the courts, and they have been cited and they have been influential. So it's not as if we're throwing out the 200-page treatise on fair use. It is still available to guide the application of this doctrine in our countries. It was also said, hey, how come search engines and YouTube are available in other countries? You might be surprised. Actually, if you go overseas and you try and access a lot of things on YouTube, it'll say, hey, this content is not available in your country. Google has a fair use playlist in the United States, which they protect. They protect certain fair use videos from being taken down. That video is blocked in 254 other jurisdictions throughout the world. There's one jurisdiction in which that fair use playlist is unblocked, and that's the United States. Likewise, I lived in Malaysia for 6 years, and content was just simply not available there. This is what drives people to piracy. We heard earlier, there were 6 different choices where I could download this movie. I had to pay $2.99. Go overseas, you're not going to find that at all. You'll be lucky if you have one place where you can download content, and that's what drives piracy.
Could we One last point, Jeremy, because we have to move beyond the copyright world.
Okay, well that's pretty
And
much.
I'm sure we'll have some Q&A.
And just finally to say that search engine functionality is also blocked in some other countries. So Google News, for example, shut down in Spain because of copyright law changes there, which made it against Spanish copyright laws. So look, these US businesses are suffering around the world from the lack of fair use and from the lack of flexible copyright exceptions. Thank you.